E67 of The Bar is Ankle High, and I'm once again joined by Jamie, the neurodivergent nurse, who's helping us while Garrett finishes up her maternity leave. Thank you so much again. And I'm really pumped because you did the research, so I just get to be entertained. But also, this is like a continuation of your Dark Side of ADHD series that you do on your own podcast.
Yeah, I love how you say that you do on your own. We did it probably 3 or 4 months ago, and, life has been happening, but it is a continuation 4 months later of, like, the little mini-sode. Um, but, yeah, I'm vacationing right now in Charleston, South Carolina, and so I thought that it would be really fun to do an episode based on someone who has ADHD, and there's kind of crime that's wrapped around this very deep with a family from about an hour and 20 minutes away from Charleston. So that's kind of what inspired this whole episode today.
Yeah, when you told me that this is what you wanted to cover, I was blown away that at least one of these people has ADHD. Um, I mean, when I think about it, it makes sense, but I was still surprised. I guess I'm always surprised because I feel like it's something that now it would get mentioned a lot more in media, and this isn't that old of a case. So I guess I'm
No.
surprised that they're not like, well, it's just my ADHD. It's not me being a bad person.
Yeah, and we'll get into it. I don't know what the defense was around like the main part with this individual, but I'm not sure that it was mentioned. I just know that it was mentioned later by his dad when
Mm.
he was having a conversation about his son. But we're going to talk. If you haven't heard about the Murdochs, and there was this big thing going on, mainly with the dad, Alec Murdoch,
Yes.
and a lot of issues. But we're really going to focus on his youngest son, Paul Murdoch, for
Is that
this
the one that goes
episode.
by Buster?
Nope, nope.
Oh,
Buster's the
okay.
older of the two.
Okay.
hmm So Paul was born on February 20th, 1999, in Hampton County, South Carolina. His mom was Margaret, who also went by Maggie Murdoch, and Alec Murdoch. It's also interesting to me that the Murdoch last name is spelled Murdaugh, but it's
Mhm.
pronounced with like a CK. So Murdoch.
Yeah, it strikes me as, um, almost very Irish, like, you have, like, McCullough, which is spelled Ough, but you don't really say it all, but also with it being, like, Murdoch, I I feel like we actually talked about this in law school once because we were talking about, transfers of property and how back in the day, most people couldn't read and write, but they could obviously speak. So you would go to your lawyer's office or whatever, and you'd have them write out a deed, but you would speak it to them and they would transcribe it. So you'd have these folks who just say words funny. And one of my classmates, their last name was Kaufman, um, and Kauffman. And his example was that his grandmother always said Kaufman. And he was like, we have no idea why she says it that way. And it is so annoying because she
Is she
says it
from the
with an
South?
L. I guess so. And so, but so she would say it like that. And so then you'd end up with these, we were talking about like title search issues. If you've ever bought property, it can be a huge freaking nightmare. But then you'd have like these transfers of property where it's like Kaufman, 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 Kaufman. And you're like, well, wait a minute, who the fuck is Kaufman and where did they come in and who'd they buy their property from? And so you'd have these things. So it struck me as either like very Gaelic pronunciation where to like my dumb American eyes, it doesn't look like it should be pronounced that way, or a Kaufman issue where someone along the line just started saying Murdoch and they just ran with it and nobody ever questioned it because this family was super fucking powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So like, how would you question it and be like, hey, dummy, why don't you say your name right?
And two, I don't want anyone to get offended. I grew up in South Carolina until I was 13 and then moved to Alabama, if you can't tell from the Southern accent. So if I make some jokes, which I'm going to probably a good amount about the South, I'm one of them. Just not the, like prominent family. So don't be
Right.
offended if you are, probably not the episode for you because I do a lot of jabs because I'm from here.
That's fine. It's better than me making jabs because y'all keep fucking up our elections. So
Katie, you can always make jabs at the South. You are like an honorary allowed. I'm not going to say member because you don't want to be a member of
that's true.
this.
You did say we could say y'all. So
Yeah, but too, his name is spelled Alex, but it's also pronounced with a CK, Alec.
yeah.
So when people are listening, if you're familiar at all, or if you've read anything, don't be like, "Well, that Southern girl over there, she doesn't know how to read." So that's
No
just
one
so you
else
know.
knows how to read, so we're just repeating what they say.
Nor spell their own name. They did not do Hooked on Phonics. They were too good for that growing up. Clearly, that's what that was. But okay, so we're going to start a little bit talking about where Paul came from as far as his mom, his dad, just to give you a little background on what the family was like. Margaret, or Maggie, I'm going to call her Maggie for this. She was a family woman. She was known affectionately as Maggie, as I said. She was the wife of Alec, and she was the mother of Paul and his older brother, Buster. Now, they were all named Randolph Murdoch. So
Even
they,
Paul?
I don't know if Paul was, but I know that Buster was Randolph Murdoch the fifth.
Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. Um, so Maggie was deeply involved with her family's life. She was also really involved in the community. Like the other members of the Murdoch family, she participated in various civic and charitable organizations. She contributed to the family's reputation for their community engagement. Because these people, whenever you have a lot of political power, normally they have a big social presence, right?
Yeah.
But it's a little weird to me because I grew up in a very poor town in South Carolina until we moved to Alabama. I mean, less than 500 people. We had one stoplight. Like it was very poor. But the town that they were a part of, um, it had an average income of barely $20,000 a year. And
Oh, wow.
almost a quarter of the population lives below the poverty line there.
Wow.
But
Is that common for
for
like
parts of
the
South
South?
Carolina, mm-hmm,
Yeah.
that's why property taxes are so much lower here, too, right? Than
Okay.
the rest of the country comparatively to like Massachusetts or New York or
Oh yeah, we got great property taxes up here. It's
your
fine. We're fine. We're doing
schools are
great.
probably a lot better too thanks to those property taxes like your
Some
public
of them.
schools. So Paul's dad, Alec, he came from this big family legacy, right? Um, so he wasn't only Paul's father, but he was a prominent figure, like we were saying, in South Carolina's legal community. He was part of the well-known firm PMPED. I would tell you what it stands for, but I can't pronounce some of the last names of that law firm. So we're just going to go with the letters.
It
But
wasn't it if I'm remembering correctly, it was his father's law firm.
mhm,
Um, which his father started after his father stopped being the solicitor, if I'm remembering
which I
correctly.
don't know how many different law firms would be in that small town. You
Probably
know what I
not
mean?
many,
Yeah.
realistically.
So
Although, yeah, like maybe one or two other ones that deal with like I don't know, like the people who hate the Murdochs,
was
like
anyone
folks.
allowed to hate them?
Well, yeah, well, or I guess if the Murdochs hated them and didn't want them to have representation, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I would imagine, especially it being a firm with 5 or 6 named partners, that's a large firm anywhere, but for sure in a small town and a, a not particularly densely populated county, that's a large firm. So I would think they would probably handle most things like real estate transactions, which is, and like wills and things like that. Most people will always see an attorney for. Like, you don't have to be in quote trouble to go to an attorney, but there's usually not a single law firm that you go to for everything that you need throughout your life. So, um,
Right, like you would have an accident injury law firm versus
well, you would need to have at least one other law firm, generally speaking, to do like a real estate transaction. Like the buyer and seller need to have separate lawyers. So there would at least theoretically be another firm. They could, you can do like a conflict consent thing, but where both parties consent to the conflict of interest. But, you know, if there's any real estate disputes, you would need a different firm to handle it. So you, at least that's how it would be in New York. So there must be like maybe one other firm, but it would have to be, I would imagine, kind of janky in comparison.
yeah, so I just looked at how many serves Hampton, um, and it came up 5 different ones.
Okay.
And Hampton also, we were talking about the population is only about 2,800, a little less than
Oh,
2,800
wow.
people in the whole town.
Man, I don't know how you deal with everybody knowing your shit. That would drive me nuts.
It was really tough growing up, I promise. I mean, I didn't have much to know, but as an adult, though, I live in a place where I don't even know how to get around the town. People be like, "So, let's go meet here." I was like, "Neat." And I'll throw on the GPS, "How long have you lived here, Jamie? And you don't know how to drive straight to this restaurant?" Yeah, I don't know.
I'll use my GPS almost all the time. Like, whatever.
So, back to whenever you asked about the family history, like the lineage of the Murdoch family.
Yeah,
So, it was nearly 100 years that the Murdoch family kept a stranglehold on the legal system in the southwest corner of South Carolina.
that is wild.
Yeah, election after election, a Murdoch filled the seat of the 14th Circuit Solicitor with full power of the prosecutor's office in over 5 counties. The rise of power with them started with Randolph Murdoch Sr., who won the open seat in 1920.
Jesus.
Yep. He was killed, though, when his car got stuck on train tracks and was hit by a freight train in 1941.
Isn't it always something?
I mean, that's pretty wild.
That
To
is
be
a
honest,
crazy way to go.
if we were to go into conspiracy theories, right? It's like, did somebody make that happen? Was that
I
really how it
mean,
happened with these powerful people?
that is, he also, though, like, given the, like, you know, that these people used to own other people,
Hmm.
like, before he was elected in 1920. And it's just the kind of thing where I'm like, you're also the guy who got absolutely, like, shit faced on a Thursday afternoon, like starting at 2 p.m. in your office. So, like, maybe you just got drunk and fell asleep on some train tracks in your car, thinking you were home and didn't hear the bells or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, that could definitely happen too.
And like, once you get hit
Especially,
by a train, there's not much left to do an autopsy on.
yes, yep, you're right. Especially around that time too.
Right, exactly. Like, goodbye, car. It just blew apart. It didn't do anything.
So this guy, he ended up having 2 sons, Randolph Buster Murdoch, and because that is the lineage name. So after 86 years of unbroken control over the solicitor's office, he decided to leave in 2005 for the law firm Murdoch Sr., started in 2010.
Okay. So, dead Murdoch Sr. started this law firm.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And he had 4 children that included Richard Alexander, which was Alec Murdoch,
Mm-hmm.
and then they also had Richard Alexander Buster Murdoch. So anyhow, that's just kind of how the whole
I'm
lineage is.
sorry. So, Randolph Murdoch Jr., aka Buster Sr., basically. had two
Yes.
sons named Richard Alexander.
It says that he had 4 children that included Alec.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah, and so then Maggie, like we were saying earlier, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear about that. But like then Maggie and Alec had another Richard Alexander Buster Murdoch.
Right. Buster Jr.
Right. What a name though to pass down. Like
I
Buster
just
is the
it's so
nickname too.
Southern, like
I don't know. I feel like Jimbo's more southern than Buster, but
well,
it's
like,
this
as
is
far
from a
as nicknames
prestigious
go,
family.
I guess, like, Jimbo or Jim Bob just makes me think of the Duggars, which is Arkansas, not Alabama, so
I mean, it's kind of close. Well, and this is South Carolina, which
yeah.
is even
Pretty far from
worse in my
Arkansas.
opinion. Yeah, but they align a lot. I mean, Sarah Huckabee and all of them.
That's true.
Yeah, she would fit in well here. So back to Alec, the dad, the one that we're talking about currently. So he too, just like his granddad, his father, he was an attorney as well, and he held a position of influence and respect in the legal field. He, like the other members, had a network of connections within both the legal and the political spheres of that area of South Carolina. And he also had, obviously, similar to the rest, he had very, very strong connections with the local community. He was very well respected. I heard about the Murdochs on TikTok back when TikTok first took off,
Oh.
and it was one of those that I was scrolling through and it said, "What is something in your town that you should not talk about?" or something along those lines. And this guy, he said that he was from South Carolina and he said it's not well known, but the Murdoch family has so much darkness surrounding them and how they keep escaping legal issues that
Oh.
even I should be fearful just making this at this point. And at that point, I had not heard,
Jesus.
yeah, I had not heard a thing about it. But years prior to what we're going to talk about, they had a maid who was found dead at the bottom of the stairs. They never did an autopsy on that. They've just had a lot of this type of stuff that has happened.
Yeah. Well, because with the maid, her sons, like, the story is that she fell down, like, she tripped over their dogs or something and fell down these
Yep.
stairs, and it was, like, 4 steps, but they were, like, brick edge, so, like, she hit her head. The story is that she hit her head on one of the corners of these brick steps, and they did call the ambulance, but they live in the middle of, like, a giant fucking field.
Mm-hmm.
So it took a while for them to get there, and this woman ultimately passed away. I think they removed life support from her. But she had 2 sons, and she had a life insurance policy, and Alec was like, "Hey, no problem. I'll represent you on the life insurance claim." And they were filing, like, a wrongful death suit against the Murdochs, and it was going to go to their homeowners insurance, which was just going to settle it, according to what Alec told the boys, or men, they were grown, but told them, like, "Oh, we'll just handle it." And so they got the life insurance, and then there was supposed to be, like, when I think the life insurance policy was maybe like $500,000, and then they were supposed to get another maybe 300,000. I'm making up these numbers, but from
Substantial to Southern people, period.
yeah, I mean, it'd be substantial. It'd wipe out all my student loans, and then I'd be able to, like, buy a house. Like, I'd be set if I had that kind of cash all of a sudden. Even if I was splitting that with my brother, like, I'd be set. And so, the but Alec Murdoch was like, "Oh, I'll represent you for it," and, like, was like, "You just sign this over to my escrow account, and then you'll get payments so that you don't have to worry about, like, basically mismanaging your money," which is the most it should be noted at this point that their housekeeper was Hispanic and her sons were Hispanic. So the idea that these grown men needed somebody to manage their money for them, it just screamed of inherent racism to me, like, when I was watching the documentary on that, because I was like, what in the paternalistic bullshit is this, that, like, oh, I'll just handle this for you so that you don't have to worry about spending all your money. Like, fuck you. It's my money. I can spend it and waste it however I want if that's what I want to do. My mom's dead. Like, it's not like I earned this money through hard work. I'm being given this money in lieu of having a living parent. So, like, what the fuck? But in any event, um, one of Alec's crimes that he was just, I believe he just plead guilty, or was he just indicted on the wire fraud charges associated um with
He
this?
he pled guilty to a lot of the financial.
Yeah, because he basically embezzled all of these payouts that these boys were supposed to get for their mother's death, and by uh, saying, "Oh, I'm your lawyer, just sign this money over to me and it goes into escrow and blah blah blah, and this way you don't have to pay taxes on it," or some bullshit he said to them, which you don't have to pay taxes on it anyway because it's life insurance proceeds. But why would you question it if your lawyer is telling you? Like, it's just the sort of thing where if you don't know to ask the question, and why would you ask the question if up to this point he's been like, yep, make a claim against my homeowner's insurance, I'll totally help you get this money, this is what homeowners insurance is for, we're so sorry, da da da, and he like comes to you with this contrition, then why would you question that he's giving you inaccurate information about your tax liability? Like, it was just this whole thing. So yeah, he pled guilty to that in addition to a bunch of other wire fraud issues. But basically stole almost $1 million from these two boys, these two men, who lost their mother as their housekeeper. And it was just, I think it was like, I don't think that's the first thing I heard. I think the first thing I heard was the boating situation, which then I immediately was followed up with the young man who was killed on the side of the road. And then once I heard about that, they were like, oh, and P.S., their housekeeper passed away. And I was like, what is up with this fucking family?
Mm-hmm.
Because I was like, that is a bizarre triad of tragedies to have happened to the same family within just a couple years. Like, that's deranged. That doesn't happen unless it's like a Stephen King book.
Or, if you get killed on railroad tracks in the 40s and people don't know to look into it, because they don't have social media.
Yeah.
Because, I mean,
Well,
it
and
can't just suddenly start happening. This has to be because you have this type of prominence, right? And when bad things start to happen, you're used to cover up. You have to be accustomed, and you have to have exposure through childhood, through adulthood, of how cover ups happen, to be able to do it and orchestrate it so well that it's not news. It just is.
yeah.
So with them, and we'll get into a bit more of what you were talking about um, with Alec too. So as we know with ADHD, one of the things that we have a higher tendency of is substance misuse and abuse, things like that, when it comes to drugs or alcohol. And now you are combining someone who has ADHD and this tendency, plus being from a very wealthy family who isn't necessarily held accountable for things that they do. I feel like this just turns into a big, dangerous thing that you get to live with all of your life, right? Like, you don't have to have responsibility. And so if you want to drink or if you want to do drugs, the parents aren't necessarily going to be very angry about it if they have kind of a sordid history. Um,
Mhm.
and they may feel like they're entitled to allow their son to be able to do these things.
Yeah, I think that's what I watched. I think it was the docu series on. It must have been on HBO Max. It might have been Netflix, but the what struck me was the footage of Buster the night of the boat crash, Buster Jr. Um, and the CCTV footage of them at the like Quickie Mart or whatever, getting another case of beer. and his behavior and the interviews with his friends that were like, oh yeah, we called him Pablo or whatever the alter ego nickname was when he got too drunk. And but I think that is like when you saw the actual video footage of him being that way, I think that was the most direct evidence that that's how he could live his life, and he knew it. And the like he was raised to not necessarily rub it in everyone's face, but he was also raised with the knowledge that everybody knew that they couldn't touch him. So like he knew that he was untouchable, and I think every male in that family knew that they were untouchable. And I think what is so eerie about that footage is really kind of seeing it play out in real time, and not just like the stories that you can get with hindsight when something bad happens where you're like, oh, well, we should have known. And it's like, no, like everybody knew. There was no should have known. Like we all fully knew. There was no question that this is how it was. And there was no second guessing it. That's just, it's like catching the school bus. Like school buses are yellow, and that's just the way it is. Like there's no questioning it. I don't know. They're just yellow. The
Yeah,
Murdochs are just untouchable.
his dad, Alex, said when he was describing Paul, he described Paul as an idiot. And he was also the one that disclosed that he had ADHD. And he said that his biggest issue with his son had been responsibility, and that Paul was really bad about completing tasks. And he would start things and maybe not quite finish it. I mean, I don't know who that sounds like.
Cannot
Do
relate.
something else. You'd find out from his friends that he had clothes spread out all over the state. He also had guns that he would just randomly leave all over the place as well.
That's a weird habit.
Yep. He said that Paul was always on the move, that he was somewhat unpredictable. And he said that it was always really hard to keep up with Paul and to know where he was going to be unless you talked to him a lot.
Well,
Which, I mean, I'm not a parent, but obviously I had parents growing up. And even now, my dad pretty much always knows where I am at 39 years old.
yeah.
So it's just, again, it comes back to the entitlement.
Well,
And
right. I think as parents, because they knew that nothing bad could happen to their kids, they didn't have that same level of like supervision over their kids. Like, yeah, like my mom generally knows what I'm doing most days. Like, and I know what she's doing. Like, it's just, I don't know, like PK will check in with me before he goes out with his friends just to like let me know where he is. Not because I'm entitled to that information. I mean, I'm kind of entitled. I live with him. But like, it's just like a normal thing when you care about somebody to like know what they're up to and what's going on in their life and how they're doing. But like but also very ADHD that like if you don't check in with me, I'm not necessarily going to think to like let you know what I'm up
yep,
to.
especially if
So
it's
like
not a
I can't put
habit.
that on Paul.
Right, because environmentally, this is how he was raised, that he didn't have to have that forethought, because a lot
Yeah.
of times we're a bit more reactive than proactive in certain situations, especially those
Mm-hmm.
situations that we're very accustomed to living life. We're sporadic, spontaneous. But all of that with Paul, as he grew up this way, it all started coming to a head because he loved to party. He had tons of friends. It all came to a head one night in 2019 in February. So they used to do these oyster roast and house party were very common in the area. And of course, the family had a boat that they would go to this oyster party on. And earlier that day,
Because it's
Paul,
not a coastal, like they're not on the coast, but they're kind of like to me, I would say it's kind of like swampy. But
yeah, there's a lot of lakes and stuff.
okay.
Like
And there was
there's,
like rivers that like connected all of these things,
mhm,
like Dawson's Creek, basically, is what it
yeah,
looked like. Yeah.
yep,
Okay.
exactly. So earlier that day in February, Paul was caught. He was captured on TV purchasing alcohol at a local convenience store. But how did this guy purchase alcohol? Well, he used Buster's ID because they both had red hair, they both looked very similar. And obviously, Paul's underage, but why wouldn't he be able to get alcohol? But at least he like tried not to just use like I am this guy.
That's true.
But also, if you know the family, don't you think that you would know the difference between the two sons in such a small town?
Well, I think it's that tongue-in-cheek thing where it's like, okay, well, at least he's making an effort. Therefore, I'm not going to make a problem. But if you just walk in and say, give me this because I'm Paul Murdoch, then it's that thing where it's like everybody's playing the same game. Like everybody knows that you can't really push him on it. But because if you call the cops on him, the cops are just going to call his dad and his dad or his granddad, and nothing will happen. You'll get in trouble. You might lose your job because now the owner of the gas station has a problem with this local powerful family. So, but like, it's like everybody knows, like, okay, if I just try to like pretend like I'm following the rules, then I can get away with it. And the person selling, the clerk is like, okay, as long as he tries, then we all agree that like this is bullshit, but it's not worth the trouble of
Right.
causing a ruckus because he's at least trying to pretend like he's of age.
And it's not like one guy has black hair and then the other brother has this bright red fiery hair and you're like, oh, did
Right.
you just get your hair color? It's easier to be able to play it off like you were completely oblivious and avoid any type of ramification on
Yes.
either side.
Yeah.
So that night they all decided that they were going to first meet at what was known as Murdoch Island, which is river property that was owned by the family of Paul. So Paul, his then girlfriend, whose name is Morgan, and their friends, they would all meet there, and then they were going to take Paul's family's boat to that oyster roast. Now he already had this alcohol. They're drinking on the boat. They're having a great time. They go to the oyster roast where there's more drinking, more partying. The GPS records pulled from the boat's device show that the group tied the boat up at the dock around 12:45. This is after they got back on the water.
And that's AM.
Yep. So
Okay.
they left the party.
Okay.
And as they were going, they stopped at this other dock. And Paul and Connor, which is a good friend of his, he went into a waterfront bar and they ordered 2 rounds of shots. So they need to drink a little bit more using Buster's ID. It said that Connor, his friend, later testified that Paul used a fake ID to get in, which, as we know, whose it is. And surveillance video captured the 2 guys at the bar while the rest of the group waited outside for their return. So, two, how arrogant is that? Like, we're all partying, we're all having a good time. It's like, yeah, I know y'all can't get in, but I just need to go have some
Well, so how
more
did Connor
shots.
get in? Because is Connor the same age?
I don't know how old he is, but I mean, he may have a fake ID too if he wasn't.
Yeah. But yeah, super
So,
douchey. Like,
yeah. So just after 1 a.m., Paul and Connor, they came out, they rejoined their friends. So they're in there about, 20 minutes, taking a couple shots. And then according to Miley, which is another one of the friends that was part of all of that, some of the group started arguing with Paul, like you were talking about, and said that he started driving in circles and really acting drunk. So
yeah.
he's getting frustrated. He's super intoxicated, but now they're coming at him and arguing with him. And so, just to show out, because it's also documented by his ex girlfriend that he had some anger issues, which
Mm-hmm.
those of us with ADHD, if we don't really work through it, many of us have those flash emotions, right? And that's
For sure.
sober version of us, which is only exacerbated when you're under like consumption of alcohol or drugs or things like that.
Yeah. And I noted, like, for me, if I, especially, well, really not now, but like when I was younger, if I didn't start my night in a good mood, then it was going to be a shitty night. So, like, if something else had already bothered him that day, because we ruminate on stuff with ADHD, like, I could see that causing him to go off the deep end in a bad way because he hasn't let it go. Nobody knows what's wrong because he hasn't told anybody what's wrong. It's just like marinating in his mind. And now he's drinking, and you're mixing liquors on top of it. And yeah, and you know, you have this power trip. Like it's his boat or his dad's boat. And you know, that's that thing. Also, like the idea, I remember in that documentary, people were saying when he was doing like the donuts in the boat that they were like genuinely scared. Like it was so out of control. He was going so fast. They were very uncomfortable and all telling him to stop. And I watched this show called Welcome to Plathville, and it's like the Duggars. Like it's about this super fundamentalist family, but the oldest son is married to this woman, and they've been married for 4 years, and she's been in several pretty severe car accidents. And they moved to Minnesota, and it was snowy, and he started doing donuts in the parking lot with her in the car, and she was like, "I'm not kidding, you need to stop. I am not having fun." And so they have like a conversation about it afterwards. And she was like, but she was like, "If I'm telling you I'm uncomfortable and you continue to do it, you're not respecting me." And it's so clear though that Paul was not respecting his friends being like, "This is not cool, man." Like, but when you're drunk, you don't really register what people are telling you. Like,
Which, too, I've known people who also have ADHD, even with driving. And like, this is kind of narcissistic, like just throwing the term out. It's not like a clinical narcissism or anything, but like when you're arguing with them, they'll switch lanes really fast, or
mm,
they'll like it's to get that reaction because they're frustrating you so much internally that you just explode, and you want them to feel the impact of
mm-hmm,
like, shut up, like you want to get them in the same way they're getting you.
mm-hmm. And it can be also, not that I think it was necessarily the case for Paul here, but it changes the conversation. So whatever they were mad at you about before, now they're mad at you about this, and you can instantly fix that by just driving safely. So the thing that they were actually attacking you for is no longer the problem, and you've kind of like diverted the attention away from what you don't want to talk about.
Right, it puts you back in power
Mhm.
because now they're begging you to stop. Now
Mhm.
they're the ones that are like asking you to whatever, like you're in control of the situation then.
Yeah.
So during this time, like you were saying, the investigators, they end up finding out that like the boat just starts going. I tried to find the exact speed because I did hear, maybe it was whenever I watched the same documentary that you're talking about, but I could not find the exact speed. But they talked about how it started going much faster on that GPS. So about 2:20 a.m. Now, we got back on the boat a little after 1. We were fighting. We're starting to become super erratic. I don't know how far it was on the waterway to get back to wherever they all met up, like to
Mhm.
each of their vehicles. But we're fast forwarding at 2:20 a.m. So almost an hour and a half later,
Yeah.
with all of this going on, the boat crashed into the Archers Creek Bridge. And so a lot of the kids were hurt on this wreck because obviously you have somebody drunk behind the wheel, they're driving erratic, they're going really fast, and then they crash into a bridge.
Yeah, and there's
Well,
no
one of
airbags
the
in a boat.
girls, right, and there's no seatbelts.
Right.
Um, so one of the girls, Mallory, she was ejected from the boat into the dark water. Connor, the one that we talked about earlier,
Mhm.
who was in the bar and stuff with Paul, he called 911 and he begged them for help.
Cuz that was Mallory's boyfriend, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the first responders, they came out, they immediately began searching for Mallory. So the then Beaufort County Deputy Sheriff, Stephen Domino, he was the first one of the responders to arrive. And thankfully, his his dash cam.
Cash Cab, do you remember that show? Oh my goodness.
Oh, so it caught the video of the scene. This guy was on 48 hours, and a couple of these were like pulled from it. But he found Anthony, who, another one of his friends, he was distressed, he was pacing. Um, he was able to calm Anthony down, and he got him to sit in his patrol car. But when Paul Murdoch walked up from the boat, Domino, the guy that we were talking about, says that Anthony got really, really agitated. And Anthony said, or Domino said that he tried to rush through me to get to Paul because I guess he saw him smiling and it just set him off again. So on that audio clip too, he was talking about him smiling and smirking and all of that, knowing
Connor
that
was.
it said that Anthony was the one who got frustrated.
The
But
cop?
I feel like it was Domino said that Anthony grew agitated.
Oh, Anthony was one of the friends?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Sorry.
So, but he was just smirking about the whole accident, the whole
Yeah.
everything going on. And then one of the guys, he was saying that, good luck charging him with this. Like he told them that
Yes,
Paul
I
was the one
remember
driving
that.
the boat.
Yeah.
And so as the cops, the people who responded, and they were like, okay, we're going to get to the bottom of this. And he's like, good luck. You clearly don't know who he is. Like he's part of the Murdoch family. They don't get in trouble for anything. Good
Because
luck.
this was in a different county, right? So it wasn't like the same cops that they usually deal with.
Right. This was Beaufort County.
Yeah. So like it was the kind of thing where they were like, no, we don't know who the fuck this kid is. But then also like, you gonna learn. Like, which is basically what that kid was telling them. Like, you think that this is just a crash and he's some dumb drunk teenager, and that's not at all the can of worms that you're dealing with right now.
Yeah, so they took all of the kids to the hospital, except for Mallory's boyfriend, who wanted to stay behind. And this is when Alec, and I believe it was his dad as well, Alec's dad, the other Murdoch, that they came in and they were demanding to talk to the kids and that they were going to take care of everything. And they tried to make it out that Connor was the one who was driving the boat. They started trying to plant those seeds. But thankfully, even the hospital staff, they were able to account like how things shifted, the things that were said, the things that the kids said even before Alec and his dad had shown up. They were also talking about how Paul was just so arrogant. He was like refusing tests, but several hours after, they drew his blood and his BAC was 0.24.
Jesus. I mean, I don't know how you're not dead. Like, I
had a patient who came in with a BAC of 0.6 something, and he was still awake. Yeah, it was like, you should be in a coma right now.
Oh my God, was his liver like just a pancake?
I'm sure.
Holy cow.
But that was the highest I've ever seen of someone.
He was more than 50% alcohol?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's nuts.
It was bizarre.
Jeez. I mean, at that point, that is like a true dependency disorder. Like your body has figured out how to survive on alcohol instead of like water.
Yeah, he was very obviously like super impulsive and very
holy moly.
Yeah.
Anything over like anything into the like, I feel like over 0.18 or like 0.2, anything over that, I'm like, holy shit. There's no way. There's no that like, and he was like up and walking around. Like that's the other thing that like when they said that, and they did it like hours later. So it was also that thing of like, you've had time to process a lot of this out of your system because you are whatever 16 or 17 and you have a little baby liver that like
but he was probably very accustomed to the high amounts and high volume of alcohol, kind of like that patient that I was talking about.
But yeah, it's just like Ugh, ridiculous. I mean, it's so frustrating too, but also clearly goes to show like the fact that he was refusing all the tests, like he knew what to say. Like you don't know to refuse those tests unless you've been coached by an attorney to refuse those tests.
Right.
And
And
up
I
here, the advice is to never refuse a test because you will lose your license for a minimum of 6 months automatically if you refuse any BAC testing.
in North Carolina, it's like that if you don't do the breathalyzer.
Mm-hmm.
Like even a field sobriety test, that they can't use the breathalyzer that's on the scene when you're pulled over, but they can in the station. But if you refuse it ever, period, doesn't matter where you
Yep.
are, you lose your license for a year. Even
That's
if
what
you
we're
take
like.
it in the place, in at the station, and it's like nothing, right? Zero
Yeah.
or less than legal limit, it's still gone.
Mm-hmm. This is not legal advice, but the general wisdom, at least in New York, is always just do the breathalyzer because maybe they didn't calibrate it or you burped or something and it's an inaccurate read. But if you refuse it, goodbye to your license. Like, figure out a way to get to work because you're not going to have a car. And we have some public transportation up here, but it is not perfect by any means.
And you were talking about with a lot of people don't know that they like, because every place is different with their what they can say to officers, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
what they can do. And that there's areas that you don't have to be quote unquote compliant. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
times you don't know that you're not under arrest. A lot of times you don't know that you can say that you can actually not answer questions and refuse to, even though it's said that. And, when you're being arrested, or at least you were, Supreme Court thanks for not making people have
Yeah.
to say that anymore. Um, but you feel like you have to be very compliant, or else it would make you seem distrustful. But I did an episode maybe a year or two ago with a former police officer about things that you can say,
Oh,
or if
really?
you have, yeah, or if you have ADHD, the things to communicate to a cop. Because like if you
Right.
have like
Like you're
very
stimming or
extreme,
something. Huh.
that it may look like you don't have great dexterity that they're going to want to use on a report to make you seem this way, or simple commands. I even have a thing that people can print out to just have on their paperwork. He said that that would be beneficial when he was a police officer. I don't know nowadays, but it's like a card that you can print out. And when you hand it to them, it says, I have ADHD. I have an issue with sensory. I need you to give me instructions. So it's not like you're even trying to make excuses. You
Right.
already have that there to give them, that they can glance at when you give them your license, registration, and all of that, so that if you have issues because the lights are going on behind you and you seem very distracted or distraught, that they already know that that's just an issue that you have.
Mm. That's great. Is that on your
Yeah.
website? That printout?
You know what? I'm not sure, but I will send you a copy of it. And I'll put it on my website somewhere. I
Okay.
know that I uploaded it for the Patreons at some point for sure.
No
But
pressure, but yeah, just so that it's available. Theneurodivergentnurse.com.
yeah, it's one of those I'm looking back, I'm like, man, why did I come up with such a long name? Because now it's like, oh, 20 minutes later, you'll have it typed in. All right. So back to Paul. He knew to just be a punk when he was trying to put off all of this stuff. But then he also had the parent stuff in
Mm.
his back pocket. And so he had that high BAC. Um, and unfortunately, a week later, Mallory's body washed up on the shore.
Yeah.
Now, you would think, just in general, you have this kid who is involved with the murder of someone, of a friend, whether it obviously was unintentional, that he would be arrested. Or nope, he wasn't. He went to court and they postponed it. And I think that it was about 3 years that they just let him off while things
Like
were.
before they even questioned him, right? Like,
Mhm.
yeah. Just wild. It's so
Yeah.
frustrating because it's the same thing that we see in the BLM protests and things where it's like there's a different justice system for privileged people than there is for everybody else. And this fully points to it. I wouldn't have the option. I have criminal defense attorneys in my family. I wouldn't have the option of not going to the fucking police if they called me in. My family would go with me and they would probably represent me or refer me to somebody who would represent me. But I wouldn't have the option of just like, nah, like what the
Mm-hmm.
fuck? Like what it's just so beyond, and it's so frustrating too, just as like another citizen, because I'm like, look, man, I follow the rules. And even with ADHD, like I go out of my way to make sure I'm following the rules because like that list that you have to give to a police officer, like sometimes I will over follow rules to make sure that I'm doing it right and to make sure that I'm not going to be perceived as misbehaving, I guess.
Right,
And
which can be very suspect. On the other hand, to
it's true.
neurotypical people.
It's true. But then you have these other people who are just like, yeah, fuck it, and go on when somebody's dead, like a child died.
Mm-hmm.
And as I think it I think that it was criminal negligence that led to her death. I don't think that it was intentional, the death,
Well, you
but it
still
was
can't drink
criminal.
and drive on a boat. I
Well,
mean,
and
you
that's
still
just
follow
it. It
under.
was it was criminally negligent. Like the speed factor at night is criminal negligence. Being as drunk as you
Reckless
were was
driving.
criminal
Mm-hmm.
negligence. Um, did he even have a boating license? Like
I would assume he did because I know in Alabama you can get your boating license at like 12.
you
So
can
I'm
have
sure
it
that was
pretty young up here too, but it's one of those things where I'm like, it wouldn't surprise me if he didn't because of everything else that we know about this family. So it's just like all these different things where I'm like, this is like grossly negligent. Like this isn't like, yes, it was an accidental death, but it's the reason we call it criminal negligence is because any sane person can look at this set of facts and be like, well, yeah, of course somebody died. Like that is a fully foreseeable outcome of these different steps
mm-hmm.
you took that night. Of course somebody died. Like you would have been the most blessed group in the nation that somebody didn't walk away that evening hurt in any way. Like if somebody was assaulted, if somebody got into a crash, if they left Murdoch Island after they got home safe to the island and then crashed their cars, like any number of things could have happened that night that could have resulted in harm and would have been foreseeable.
Which, if he
Especially
was underage and drinking and he had the alcohol on the boat, then he's also given it to his friends. So I mean,
mhm,
that's just another. Which I don't think that was anything either that added legally that they added to it. But
mm.
I mean, you're distributing to minors as a minor as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I wonder how the law is written because obviously like distribution of alcohol to minors is a crime, but I'm wondering if you have to be over 21 for that to be a crime
Right.
because somebody's giving you the alcohol or you're obtaining it. I mean, otherwise it perhaps falsifying a state document would be the crime because he used a fake ID or passed off his brother's ID as his own. Um, that would be more the crime. But I'm wondering if the distribution of alcohol to minors would be considered a crime because he was also a minor.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't know.
Because
But yeah,
South
I mean,
Carolina
it was
is
just a whole
weird with
series
their
of things.
crimes.
But to have that reaction to, one of your best friend's girlfriends dying because of you, like it wasn't because of her. She didn't contribute to this other than telling you to stop the boat and stop driving like an asshole. And to have that reaction, for your whole family to have that reaction to her death is just, it's such an abomination. And yeah, anyway, I interrupted you.
Oh no, you're well, that accident and the aftermath of it is really what raised questions about the influence of the Murdoch family.
Mm,
And Paul, of course, coming from a prominent legal dynasty. So there were allegations that the family's connections might have affected the handling of the case. I mean, That doesn't shock
Yeah.
anybody,
It's
which also led to delays in the legal process.
yeah,
So the
which is
legal case
dangerous. That's why we
sure
have the
is.
right to a speedy trial, because your memory fades, everybody's memory
Mhm.
of the event will fade. You get um you'll even as a passenger on that boat, you're reading a news report and suddenly your memory changes. Like there's plenty of studies on how fallible our memories are, but to have that much time pass and then you're talking with people, you change, what you're convinced happened changes. And then the the biological evidence, like the DNA and stuff that we could check, the BAC levels and the camera footage and all this stuff, you end up losing it because they're not following up on stuff the way they need to.
And unfortunately, the legal case that was stemming from the boating accident was still pending at the time of Paul Murdoch's death in June 2021. So his dad just got convicted not long ago for the murder of Paul and his mom, Maggie.
Yeah,
It happened
wild.
after that when everything just really started to crumble around him. So,
Yeah.
unfortunately, for the family of Mallory, the girl who was murdered because of the recklessness of Paul, I know that they filed to try to get stuff too, like legally, as well as Connor. I think Connor sued Alec for defamation
Mm,
with trying to
yes.
put the accident on him as well. But Paul never got the true day in court to suffer the consequences of his action.
Yeah. And did Alec ever say why he chose to kill his son and wife?
No, he still says that he didn't. The
Okay.
staple in the case, though, because he said he wasn't there, but the staple in the case was that Paul had recorded something on Snapchat where Alex voice was heard on it out at the site of the death, and it was around the
Oh,
time right before the murder, so it fell into that time frame and they could hear Alex's voice, and so that was the nail in the coffin. But Alex said that he just like lied to protect his family and stuff, and he wasn't completely honest about being there because it just snowballed. But he never admitted. He still claims that he's innocent.
does he still stand by the idea that some random shooter grazed his head and that's how he got shot on the side of the road?
I,
Or has
I'm
he
I'm
admitted that
not
he shot
sure.
himself?
And hire somebody else to take the fall for it.
That was the it was the not the same night that his wife and Paul
Right.
died. It was a different night, but
It
like,
was later.
oh, so it was after they died that he like called.
So
So it was like all of a sudden, and I feel like this was maybe around the time that I was like learning about this case, because then the Murdoch Murders podcast started. And I think it was like recommended to me by the algorithm. And so I
yeah,
was
it was
like,
in summer that the murders happened for
yes,
his wife and son, Paul and Maggie.
right,
But in September,
right. So
he
he was
arranged
like
for another
about
man to
to,
kill him earlier so that he
yeah,
could collect a 10 million life insurance policy. Um,
yeah. And like, but there wasn't another person, right? He just
yeah, there
said
was
that
a
there
guy that he
was.
had paid, Curtis Edward Smith. They actually arrested that guy and charged him with assisting Alec for staging his own killing.
I don't know how you're going to collect life insurance as a dead person, but also how you collect life insurance as a living person.
Yeah.
Like you can't be the beneficiary of your own life insurance policy. That's like the one thing about it. You can like, you can have it go into a trust, you can have it go to your kids, but like you can't have it go to you, the dead person. Like what like
And
as a
he knows
lawyer, he
that
should
stuff.
know this. Like, it's very straightforward. Yeah, that was a wild turn in that case because he started off saying like, "Oh, people are targeting me because I'm being
Mm-hmm.
wrongfully accused of killing my wife and son and all this other shit. And then it was like, well, you were supposed to turn yourself in like the next day or something for like
Or maybe he
questioning.
thought that he'd be able to wrap it back around to saying that his whole, because originally he said after his son Paul was murdered, he was like, oh, the boat crash. Paul had gotten so many threats of people he didn't know because of the boat crash. So I'm wondering if he was going to try to make it look like people were just out to get his entire family, and that's why Maggie and Paul got murdered.
Yeah, I think so.
And
I
then when he
think
got busted, he was like, oh, it's because I'm addicted to oxycodone.
yeah, I think he murdered Paul because I think he finally realized that no matter what, his son was going to go to jail um for probably quite a while, and they were going to be uh well,
Tainted.
uh, I would say they were going to be bankrupted because there would be civil suits and like victim compensation for the consequences of that verdict, that guilty verdict against Paul, were there to be one. So if you make it impossible to have a guilty verdict because now there's no living criminal, then you alleviate that. But now knowing what we know, they were in bankruptcy anyway. There was no money to pay for anything anyway. So that would have been found out. I think I
I think
thought
it's
there
just a
was
terrifying spiral that you try
yeah,
anything to dig your way out and it just keeps
yeah.
getting
And I think
worse.
that's why unfortunately why his wife had to die, quote unquote, had to die, because I think she um to whatever extent she was compliant in this family's doings and dealings, I think that she started asking questions um about their finances that he didn't have answers to, or he knew that if Paul died and she was alive, then she really would start asking questions. Um but yeah, and then he blamed it on having an oxy addiction, which I don't believe. I'm sorry. I don't believe that he was addicted to oxy. Um I I don't believe it. Like it's just a very convenient excuse to have all of a sudden after embezzling millions from your clients and your law firm and
Well, they found
murdering
that
your
his
kid.
wife was Googling pills and stuff, like to
Yeah.
try to figure out what the pills were, like a green with 30p on it capsule, which they found out was like nighttime medication, is what she
Okay.
discovered. So there was suspicion from his family, and supposedly Paul had told his dad, like, it has to stop, that Paul discovered that type of stuff, that he had been using pills.
Do we know if Paul was taking any ADHD medication?
I don't know that. I just only heard Alec mention it. I don't know when he was diagnosed. I don't
Mm.
know any of that stuff.
Because then I
But
wonder if Paul was calling him out on it, if it was because his dad was taking his meds.
oh, very could
Um,
be.
and which, I mean, again, we know it's hereditary. It's plausible to me that it followed the father's line, and
I thought the
maybe
same thing.
he didn't take, like he might take Adderall and have no real high from it because it's just working the way it does in people who are
Or may help him
neurodivergent.
focus, and
Right. So
he appreciated that.
and when it especially, I mean, I'm in the public sector now, but in private sector, there is an expectation that lawyers just grind and you're constantly working and you're doing 60, 70, 80 hours a week. In any private firm, small or large, that you are putting in that time and you're always available to your clients. So if he's able to stay awake and he can take, an Adderall at 7 a.m. and then take another one at 4 p.m. and work until 11 or 12 o'clock at night and get all these papers filed and they're spell checked and they're edited well. He seems like a super lawyer. Like, so I could understand the temptation if you're already he's set up his life in a way that is expected of him. And I think it if it's just interesting because it was such a house of cards. Like any one of those things, if any one of those things hadn't happened, I think we would not know the Murdoch name. You might, being from the South, but like I probably wouldn't have heard of it.
Yeah, and I mean, clearly that one guy on TikTok, it was still under wraps and it was held in such
Yeah.
small. But that is the twisted mind of Paul Murdoch.
It's too bad that I think he didn't have a fair chance to do good with his life. I think that it's that thing where um there's like there's a the talk of like people from a lower socioeconomic status have quote unquote fewer opportunities because they just don't have the same opportunities as somebody from a high economic echelon. But I think also in Paul's case, we can see that somebody from a high economic echelon was also not really given too many options. And if your own father is calling you an idiot, it's that thing like don't be your kid's first bully. Like what the hell,
Mm-hmm.
man? Don't have kids. You don't have to have kids. And if you're going to have them, don't be their first bully. So I feel
Absolutely.
badly, but that doesn't excuse his choices that he did make. But I do think that his parents set him up to make poor choices and expect that he wouldn't have to pay any consequences. I mean, I have consequences, and I think that's the difference. Like even as a kid, yeah, no, I had timeouts and I lost privileges and all sorts of stuff when I stepped out of line. But I don't know that he did because it sounds like at least his father had no interest in engaging with being a parent. So if you can throw money at it or swoop in and do like the triage problem solving for any issue that your kid has to the point where somebody on TikTok is like this family handles everything in this town, you are handicapping your child, I think, by doing that.
Before even all the craziness happened, like
Exactly,
even more
exactly.
so.
Like he also, I mean, with how much that child was drinking, he obviously did not have excellent coping skills for whatever was going on in his life. Even with, okay, plenty of teenagers party and drink. And like, there's all those memes about how when we were kids getting drunk in a field with no cell phones in sight and like all that stuff. I never did that because I wasn't very cool.
Me neither.
But I've seen
Small
the
town,
meme.
everybody would know.
I've seen the meme enough that I feel like it did happen. But I just wasn't invited. But so that, I mean, it does happen, but obviously to the point that his friends had a nickname for his drunk alter ego. He was obviously doing this as like a lifestyle. So he was regularly, I think, probably self-medicating for depression, anxiety, ADHD, some other stuff that he might have had going on that we don't know about. And if your parents only want you there to show you off, well, that's you're going to need to let the steam off the gasket somehow and have a release. And unfortunately, Paul's way of blowing off steam cost somebody their life. So,
So the moral of this story is it's so important if you have ADHD. And of course, not every person who has ADHD, they're going to make choices that lead down this path. But obviously, it's not uncommon. It's not something that doesn't ever happen.
mhm.
So I just want to encourage anyone who struggles with ADHD, struggles with maybe using substances to kind of help quiet the mind or coping. There are really great resources that you can utilize, even if you don't want to go down the medication route. There's still other tools, there's therapy, there's people that you can reach out to. We're now at an age where you can try to help yourself too. That we have a little bit more at our fingertips that we didn't have available 10 years ago or places like that. But I really encourage people that if you're struggling to look into therapy as a first option to see what good ways they have to help you manage the struggles that come with having an ADHD brain.
Mhm. Yeah, in the US, you can call 988 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to be put in touch with a trained counselor. And even if you just want to check in and say, like, hey, do you think this is something that I should go to therapy for? Because I think that that's a lot of like getting in the door if you're not comfortable with therapy is being like, well, doesn't everybody deal with this? Like, it's not really that big of an issue. And like, I think just having kind of that unbiased permission maybe to like try therapy or to seek out more detailed assistance could be helpful as well. So if you're not sure, I mean, it's they don't like send the police to your house necessarily. um
Even if you're saying, maybe it's not that big of a deal, doesn't everybody deal with it? If it's enough of a question to be on your mind because it's impacting your life, then it is important enough to find a way to deal with it. It doesn't matter if the entire world has this exact same issue that you have, it's enough where you're saying, maybe this
mm,
isn't okay for me to have to deal with it. And that is valid enough to move
yeah,
forward.
yeah, no, that's a good point. And it's 741-741 to text with somebody who's also trained, and you can just ask those questions if texting is more comfortable for you.
Great to
um
know, Katie. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, that was a great episode. Super interesting and sad, but a little bit different than Richard Ramirez.
Well, I knew a little bit more going into it today, so which is also a big difference. I don't know what jewelry I'm going to send you today. Maybe boat earrings? I will see. I'll design a boat crash.
There we go. Well, thank you again so much for helping us. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody who's listening to this. I hope you have a lot of turkey and mashed potatoes and stuffing with all of the gravy that you want. Um, where can our listeners find you, Jamie?
They can find me at the Neurodivergent Nurse on Instagram, as well as there's a website, obviously, the Neurodivergent Nurse. Thanks, Katie, for plugging that earlier, where you can get access to stuff. And I'll make it where you can get access to that card that I was talking about that you can print off and add to your paperwork as well. On Threads, occasionally, I like the spot. I'm just kind of busy for it.
Yeah.
And the podcast, or I also obviously have the podcast, The Neurodivergent Nurse, that isn't just true crime related. There's also some great tips and some focus that you can scroll through and see if maybe you're suffering from rejection a little bit, that you can just listen to that episode. They're normally pretty quick.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Your episodes are great to listen to when like I'll like race myself to finish a chore. And I'll put on one of your episodes. I love your RSD episode.
Thanks.
But yeah, I'll do that and then I'll like fold all my laundry and put it away because then it's like just enough time for your episodes to like get it all done and then I can just be like, okay, now I'm done with my chores. I did it.
I'm glad I can be that unknown cheerleader and stopwatch for you. I also have Patreon where I do extra podcast episodes, depending on what tier you choose, and that I add extra topics in there. It's more of a blog format too for the things that aren't
Mm,
podcast episodes. That has a little bit more detail, a little bit more imaging, kind of like the neurodivergent nurse does. And if you join the patreon.com/the neurodivergent nurse, I do webinars. I've taken a break from the past couple of months, but I normally go through about 6 months where I do monthly webinars, and those are always free, no matter what tier. And if you join Patreon, you can go back through, I think maybe I have 6 up right now that I've done previously, from flash emotions to motivation, organization, things like that. So it's a good time.
yeah, I will say I've been to a few of your webinars and they're great. They're actually very helpful and you like follow along if you're like watching live, you follow along kind of like on a PowerPoint and then you have like worksheets and stuff that people get for attending like
Yeah,
when they
like a
attend. So
follow
like
up.
yeah, like what you talk about. One of the ones I went to was like something with organization and like time management. And so you were talking about like the thing with the four squares
The
and like
Eisenhower matrix.
yes, I can never
Mhm.
remember the name of it. But that was one of the worksheets that we got afterwards. So you do get those if you go to if you attend Jamie's webinars. They're really great. For us, we are on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads at The Bar is Ankle High. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/The Bar is Ankle High. Episodes every Thursday. Leave us a 5-star review because we're cute. And Garrett will be back starting in December. So this is the last week that our Patreons will be getting ad-free episodes at all tiers, as far as we know. And we'll be back with adding our bonus episodes onto Patreon, which took a little hiatus while Garrett was MIA with the baby. And so starting in December, we'll have more Patreon bonus episodes and content for you if you're on Patreon. But until then, check in with yourself and ask for help, even if you're not sure that you need it.
And don't drive a boat in donut circles to make other people angry in excessive speeds.
Yeah, because the bar is ankle high.